Welcome to Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective podcast, where we meet experts from all walks of life to learn their intrinsic motivation so that they can share it with the world. What do we have in store today? Stay tuned to find out more. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody out there in podcast land. You are now in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza.
And I'm David.
And today we are in for a treat. We have a person that tried to escape her past from her surname that we had a little fun with today. But she's going to tell us more on a serious note. She is a trauma healing coach. And as a domainer, I am actually jealous that she actually owns traumahealingcoach.com. That's probably worth a pretty penny. And she's the author of a book that came out last year called From Generation to Generation, Healing Intergenerational Trauma Through Storytelling. I welcome Emily the Wanderer Cohen. Welcome to the podcast, Emily.
Thank you, Hamza. And actually, that book was out last year, but it actually, the crazy coincidence of right timing is everything. It actually is now in bookstores, paperback as of yesterday. So
congratulations!
Bookstores all across the country. I actually went to my favorite bookstore, which is Powell's, and fretted that they didn't have it, but the woman says, "Oh yeah." Mm-hmm. So I got to hold my book in a real bookstore.
Very nice. Does that mean that you are going to tour the United States promoting the book?
Well, actually, I'm touring the United States, but in a different reason, in a different way, because the book is really just a launching pad for my work with clients and getting the message out about intergenerational trauma. So I do a lot of speaking as well.
Mm. There is a school of thought that, gone are the days where people handed out business cards. More of your establishing your pedigree is the book that you've written. And you've done it both in electronic form, and now, as of yesterday, you have the physical copy. And so you are now official, as they say.
Yes, I am. And can I tell you something else?
Yeah. Please do.
My next book, the second book, actually came out electronically yesterday, too.
Wow. You're on a roll.
Is it a series, or what is the second book about?
Well, it's not intended to be a series, but the second book does pick up where the first one leaves off. And it touches on how I had to care for my mother, the Holocaust survivor, who was an abusive parent, and how I cared for her at end of life. And so the book is called The Daughter's Dilemma, a survival guide for caring for an aging abusive parent. And yeah, I'm all about the lighthearted reading, aren't I?
Seriously. Wow. Well, oh my goodness. Wow, we have to have you back. But let's start from the beginning with the impetus.
Which is a very good place to start.
Right. What was the impetus? And I'll let you start from there, and we can build on that.
For the first book. Well, I will say that I've been a writer all my life, writing short stories for myself when I was younger, and then writing became my profession, but I was a marketing writer. And writing a book, whether it was fiction or nonfiction, was not on my bucket list. Although people would always say, "Oh, you're a writer. Are you going to write a book?" No. And then my mom passed away in December of 2014 at the age of 1993. And I started to write her story, which is very common for a second-generation child to do. I started to document her story. And as I started to do that, a neighbor of mine who was a high school English teacher and just agreed to help me kind of clarify my style and writing. And she said, where are you in this? And I looked at her and I said, it's not my story, it's her story. She says, I think you're in here. I want you, and I was avoiding it. She was right. We avoid the things that cause pain. And, we try to find a shortcut. So she was right. I had to go back and dig in, and I was avoiding a lot of the hard stuff. The very first chapter of the book talks about my mom pulling my hair and scratching my face and doing, a lot of these awful things that I didn't really think about as, quote unquote abuse back then. We didn't talk about it. But so now I ended up, going on that path and thinking, okay, so I'm really doing some hard work here. What else? How do I connect this back to my mom's situation in Germany before the Holocaust and then in concentration camp? And I connected some dots. There were things that made sense once I started to think back to what happened to her and then how she raised me and the things she kind of passed down unwittingly, as well as things that she, did consciously that made me then act out or make a decision that I probably wouldn't have done in another, if I was somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Do you, I mean, there's so many questions from avoiding pain to actually confronting it, and
right.
Getting through such healing is a transformation in itself, I believe.
It is. It's incredibly transformational. And, I mean, people who know me now and knew me before I addressed this when my mom was alive and I was dealing with it, I am a totally different person. I was anxious all the time. I blew up at the drop of a pen. Stress was not something that, I felt it all the time, but I didn't deal with it very well. I was afraid of getting on planes. I was always canceling things, and travel was part of my business, and I would cancel at the last minute because I was afraid I wouldn't get home. Those are just, a few of the things that kind of marked my personality for many years. And, I honestly can't remember the last time that I got really angry at something. I can't. Since I finished writing, I honestly can't. I remember somebody like poking the bear, like trying to get me mad, and I just looked at them like, not going to happen, So, it was not easy. And now, my mission, my goal is to help others because I've been through it. And I know it's easier if there was somebody, if I had somebody holding my hand through it and telling me what to do. So, or, that's okay. You can cry. You can address that. We'll come back to it tomorrow, whatever. That's what I do with my clients now. And I help them get through. And what I always say to them is there's, the only way through is through. You can't really, there's no workaround.
As you were talking, I was thinking about contracts, soul contracts that we have, and there's a saying that we pick our family and
right.
pick our relationships and all. And as you were telling that story, it made me think of that, and that you're, in a way, I want to get your opinion on this. If your mother didn't put you through that, I mean, she was the conduit to bring you to your stage today, and you wouldn't have been able to achieve that without her.
Ooh, that's an interesting question. No, I wouldn't. I clearly wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I were not her daughter. But there is that train of thought that says we pick our parents, right? Mm-hmm. As before we're born, we choose our parents to then fulfill our life's destiny. And I've had some, the first time somebody said that to me, I kind of went, really? You really think I picked her? Why would anybody do that, right? But it really does hold true. I mean, there's something now that I am driven to focus on this topic. It is incredibly difficult to deal with, but also incredibly fulfilling when I work with clients or, potential clients, and I'm speaking, and all of a sudden the light bulb goes off and they go, that's it. That's what was happening. And then I can help them through the process. It's amazing when I get to the end of the program with some of my clients and they're just like, I never knew I could do this. You had faith in me and I didn't think I could do it. I thought I was going to turn away. And I said, well, if you'd done it by yourself, you probably would have.
I think that's another staple for you, in that sometimes, especially when you're talking about going through trauma, somebody may isolate themselves and feel as though, it's them against the world, or they're doing everything on their own. And here you're, in essence, an olive branch that's reminding them that that's not always the case, or it doesn't have to be the case.
I like that, the olive branch. Trees are a big imagery for Judaism and also trauma. The ginkgo tree, it has a lot of resilience. So that's interesting. Olive branch. We'll just, sorry, kind of an aside there. But I guess, yeah. I mean, what happens, honestly, is the first time I talk to people and say, here's what I do. When they, they find me somehow, and then they come, they go, oh, I'm not ready for that. Oh, I don't have time for that. And then, are you guys still there?
Yeah.
Oh, that was weird. Sorry, it went, I heard click, click, click. I heard a funny noise. So, at first, and then they go away. Very often they say, well, that's okay, but I'm not ready. And then something happens in their life. Something happens, like a friend dies, or they have a brush with death themselves, or a child graduates from college and, they have a life cycle event. And then they come back and say, okay, I know I need to do this, but I can't do it myself. And that's when we engage. I see it over and over. It is scary to do it. I didn't start the process myself thinking I was going to heal. I was just trying to it was cathartic. I just wanted to, okay, I'm going to just put all this stuff together and get it out of me. But getting it out of me meant getting it out of my head, where it would just circulate in my brain over and over and over, and I gave my thoughts a place to land. And then when you can look at your thoughts on a piece of paper or virtual paper, you do get distance from it. It's a different experience reading what your thought was versus just simply thinking it. Because you can change it.
Emily, let me ask you, were you a single child?
I was.
Brothers? Yeah, okay. I was just curious. I've just known situations where people are experiencing, abuse from their parent, and they have multiple siblings, but for whatever reason, it was just always going towards, this one particular sibling. So I was just curious. Yeah, brothers and sisters, and if they were experiencing the same thing, or obviously it was just you.
Yeah, it was just me, but I want to add, because a lot of times when people finish my book, they will email me or, message me and say, you know what, you don't mention your dad very much in the book. Why is that? And, my first reaction for a long time was, well, he didn't traumatize me, and, this was really about my relationship with my mom. But the more I got to thinking about it, I realized that my dad couldn't protect me from this because she was traumatizing him too. She was, have you ever seen a very tiny 5'4" woman push her husband down? She pushed my dad down several times. He was not a big man, but still he was stocky, and she was physical with him as well. And I realized that, if he stuck up for me or tried to intervene, that he would get her wrath too. So, but we didn't talk about it. It wasn't like we talked and said, okay, we're going to be a united front. It didn't happen. But the more I think about those times where she just was awful to him, just as much as she was awful to me.
Yeah. Emily, I wanted to ask you, do you know how old your mother was when she was put into a concentration camp?
Yeah, I do. She was born in 1922 and went to concentration camp in 1941.
Okay.
So she was 19.
Mm-hmm.
And she was recently married. So
how long was she there for?
She was in for 2 years, 2.5 years.
2.5 years she was there.
Yeah. And apparently, according to family discussions that I've had, and I can't find a documentation of this, but both her husband and my mother were what's called Mischling. So one parent was Jewish and one parent was not. My grandfather converted to Judaism, but they didn't really recognize that. The Nazis didn't recognize that. So they considered my mom half and half, and apparently Peter was as well, and so they didn't get picked up for camp as early as some others.
Mm-hmm.
That's one story.
Did your mother have brothers and sisters?
She had a brother who died when he was 1 or 2.
Okay.
From polio.
Okay.
So she was also basically an only child.
Okay. Just kind of curious about that. I know someone who, they had their grandparents were, in the Holocaust, and I don't know even how to explain it, but she, her grandmother and her grandmother's brother survived, and they were in the concentration camps, but they survived. But her grandmother lost two of her sisters and both her parents, and so I was just curious about if there was any other family members.
Yeah. Well, I still have family in Germany because of my grandfather. Actually, Germany and Poland because of my grandfather. My grandmother. So I'm actually a third generation as well as a second generation survivor because my grandparents made it out too, shockingly. But my grandmother was one of 10, and eight of them perished. It was just my grandmother and her brother, Fritz, who was here in the States and was their sponsor.
Okay.
When you travel, Emily, for work, do you listen to a lot of podcasts?
I do.
Do you listen to the Revisionist History with Malcolm Gladwell?
I have, yes. I love Malcolm.
He's great, isn't he? He's awesome. And so I'm sitting in traffic and, listening to a lot of podcasts. So anyway, one of his most recent ones that I want to ask you about, he was talking about the wall in Mexico, or the proposed wall. And did you hear that podcast?
No, I did not. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm going
no worries.
now, like tonight.
I gave you a homework assignment. So he was talking about looking at it from an economic standpoint. He does a lot of social issues, but he also looks at it from an economic standpoint. And so in Mexico in the 60s, I want to say 65 to 85, there was a huge population that was we called revolving revolving citizens, meaning that when the wall, there wasn't a big security wall or anything like that. So what they would do is they would come to the United States around May in the springtime and work all summer in the fall, and then in the wintertime they would go back home. And the reason why they were doing that was because a lot of their family they never really left their family. Their family stayed behind in Mexico, and they brought the money back that they made in the States. And so he was talking about, today obviously it's a lot harder because it's harder to get across, and when you get across, it's you can't go back, right? You're kind of stuck. And so he was saying that in this example, they were able to keep a strong sense of self and heritage because they were able to go back and forth because it was so close, as opposed to Jewish or other people that came from Europe and never really went back just due to economics. And so when you're talking about third generation survivorship and so on, I wanted to get your take on how it could potentially be different if it were easier for families to kind of go back and forth to kind of, touch the homeland. How easy? I mean, not easy, but a different perspective, a different perception as to, this is your homeland, but we only get to go there maybe once in a lifetime type of deal. I mean, it's easier to travel now, but because you're third generation, but I'm thinking other generations up to you, how often did they go home, and what kind of impact did that have because you're not able to go home, and you're leaving under they were dire circumstances, So I was just wondering your take.
Well, it's okay, but I don't know that it's that straightforward. So my grandparents and my mother came over together. My grandfather would go back to Germany every other summer to see his family. Okay. My grandmother said, I'm never going back. I don't ever want to set foot there That's fine if you want to go, but I'm not going. So, you know, I grew up with a really interesting, I mean, that's an interesting dichotomy. It's like, am I supposed, is it okay for me to want to go to Germany, or is it not okay, right?
Right.
And then my mother went back without telling me. My mom was, well, she was an interesting person, and this is one of those things. She didn't tell me she planned it. She was going back. She had not been back before, and this was when I was already married, had kids. She said, well, I'm going, Em. And I'm like, well, I want to go with you, but I can't because I have other plans. That's okay. I'm going to go by myself. But she then ended up being more like my grandfather, because she started going back and seeing the Catholic family, and I've been back and seen them. I know people won't like it when I say this, but I actually feel more comfortable in Germany sometimes than I do here. And I think it's because I speak fluent German and I blend in that way. And I have my cousins. I adore them. They are fabulous people and lots of fun. So, you know, I don't know a lot of survivors who go back for pleasure. They will go back for a reunion of survivors. Or they don't go back. Or they'll go with their child or grandchild for a specific purpose. But it's not like very many survivors or their second gens go to Germany just for vacation. But I have a different connection because I have Catholic family. I mean, I have family. I shouldn't keep calling them Catholic. I have family that I'm close to. My cousin Achim was very, very good to my mom and helped her get some reparations. And he actually ended up helping me find my half-brother that I didn't know I had. So he's a mensch.
I'm laughing on two sides. One, because you kept mentioning before you corrected yourself, your Catholic family, and I was wondering why you made that distinction. One of my sister's husbands, he's German, and they, you know, over there they're really strong in lineage as far as, you know, this is what our lineage is, you know, versus the States. The States is more of a melting pot, right? And so I was just wondering, you kept making the distinction from Catholic family due to your German influence.
Yeah, and I think, you know what, boy, this is great. You're actually making me think I've got some more stuff to write about, more feelings. That's fantastic. I love it. I love it when somebody pushes me and when I've got this, you know, aha moment. I think it's because among Jews, it's shocking to some that when I say, oh, I'm going to Germany to visit cousins, they kind of look at you like, what? How do you have cousins there? And then I inevitably have to go through the whole process. Well, my grandfather was born Catholic, and he converted to marry my grandmother in 1919, and he was circumcised at that point, so he's my hero. That's part of my story. You know, because who does that, right? That's love. And so I always feel like I have to go back to explain all that. So I think that's why I say it. But it is kind of interesting because I do know that I'm closer to that family, and my mother was closer to that family than her mother's side, who is here. And I have cousins, and I don't have a relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's really, really interesting.
And another favorite of mine for podcasts is Clark Howard, and he's a consumer advocate. If you don't know about him, but anyway, he reminds me. You're familiar with him? So okay, great. So today the podcast I was listening to today, I think it was a week ago, they were talking about retirees retiring out of the United States and the pros and cons, and there's a huge contingent going to Panama, there's a huge contingent going to Vietnam, or going back to their homeland, right? If the medical situation is taken care of, and so on and so forth. And it's I don't know if that's your leanings, but twice in this podcast, not knowing us, you mentioned the comfortability living there, and I don't know on a scale of 1 to 100 how close that would be of you moving back.
Would I do that?
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Last time I was there, I was looking for houses.
Oh, wow.
Well, there were 2 houses right near my cousin's that were for sale. And I honestly thought, you know what? Life would be simpler. It just felt... There's just a different vibe. First of all, I will say, in Germany, putting out Nazi propaganda or talking about, using the Iron Cross or anything, that's illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And so that feels better to me. Like, I feel like, hey, I could live there and I have no problem saying I'm Jewish, and people go, great. I actually, since then, have known, I've come to know several people who live in Berlin. They're Jewish. They live in Berlin, and people question them, and I say, you have no idea. It is so much easier to be here than it is to be in the States.
Mm.
I can't tell you if I would honestly do that. I do have dual citizenship now. I got it from my kids as well as myself. I went back and I had, all the documents from my parents, which was super lucky. So I could do that. And I did it for my kids, hoping that if they want to go work in Europe, that they have an easier time. But now I'm thinking, it might be a longer term, living situation. I don't know. If somebody said you have to go somewhere, you can't live in the States, you just have to go somewhere else, I would go to Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Hands down. And some people would go to Israel, but I don't speak Hebrew. I'm sure I could pick it up, but I already speak fluent German, so it's easy for me to fit into that culture. And gosh darn it, when I go to the meat market, all that yummy sausage, I can't get that up. It's German soul food.
Now I sound like a travel agent because I'm trying to get you to go over there.
I haven't.
No twisting your arm, right?
Yeah. Yeah, darn. And it's all the stuff that when my dad would eat it when I was a little girl, I'd go, oh, gross. And now, oh, I can't wait.
One of my cousins, he just came back from Berlin. He was doing some traveling there, the summer. So anyway, he's a college student, and he's going around at the hostels and meeting people, and one of the girls that he met was complaining about how much tuition was in room and board. And he, when she told him what it cost, he was like, I'm going to school in Germany.
Right.
Like,
I know. It's nothing, right?
It's nothing. Yeah.
I know. Well, and I have one son and one daughter. My son just graduated in May, and he was somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 a year because he had an academic scholarship. And my daughter is going into her second year at BU, and it's upwards of 60.
Mm-hmm.
It's brutal. And that's just tuition. That's not books. That's not her sorority fees. That's not, because she had to do that too. That's not her, anything else. It's not her apartment this coming year. It's just, I really understand people who just cannot afford that. It's killing me.
All of my nieces and nephews, I sit them down and make them watch Where to Invade Next by Michael Moore. It's a great movie to see. I mean, it's so great to see that there's a world. I mean, it feels like 1492 sometimes here, that if you leave the States, you fall off the planet. And, it's good to let people know that there is a world outside of our borders.
Yeah. I mean, my daughter is actually studying to be a pastry chef, and so she's fully planning to go to live in France at least for a year.
Nice.
And I'm going to have to go. I'm clearly going to have to go and sacrifice. But I think so many Americans, honestly, I mean, we're way off our original topic, but it's great. So many Americans really have no idea of the rest of the world.
Yes.
And I really feel that that's part of what's going on with Mexico and, with what's going on right now. And I don't want to get political, but it's just very easy when you haven't been there to stereotype somebody.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I agree.
So, yeah. I mean, I had an El Salvadoran nanny for many years when I was when my son was born, and then until my daughter went to preschool. So I don't know, 6-7 years. And she had left El Salvador because her husband was violent, and she stashed her 2 kids who were teenagers with other relatives where he couldn't find them, and then she came over here. And now I'm sitting there thinking, I just was always so grateful to the U.S. for having taken her in, and then her kids eventually came over, and they're adults now. But I just look at her and think, really? She's contributing to society. She's the farthest thing from violent ever. She raised my kids when I had to work. They adored her. We're still in touch. How could somebody just say, well, she needs to go back where her husband still lives, or her ex, whatever. I don't think she ever got divorced, but he's still going to be trying to kill her.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? Can somebody explain this to me?
Yeah.
I have a question, Emily, about time and your healing with trauma. So my father is 70, and so he did 2 tours in Vietnam. And, in our conversation, he's like, until recently, he was able to close his eyes without the fear of being transported back to the war zone. And I wanted to know the percentage of post-traumatic stress disorder that you deal with when overcoming trauma when you're working with clients?
PTSD is clearly what we're dealing with. It's definitely, the main thing that ends up coming up. Dealing with my clients, and one of the first things that we talk about is, I want them to document, go back to a specific experience that they've experienced and write about it. And that usually uncovers at least one or two triggers. Like, okay, that's why this is happening. That's it. I guess I just feel it's so interesting that PTSD really, as a syndrome, was not really even recognized till 1980, right? After Vietnam.
Right. Yep.
And so most of the Holocaust survivors, my mother included, didn't think they needed therapy or anything. And a lot of 2Gs, I didn't even have therapy till I was married. I was in my 30s. So, a lot of my clients now, they kind of know that they're dealing with PTSD, but they don't know from what. Does that answer your question?
It does, because I wonder, you can go down this rabbit hole from someone that reaches out to you and then they're going through the process to ultimately work with you, to ultimately, like you said, having that light bulb go off. I was just wondering if it's not a one-size-fits-all, but there has to be some type of, I guess, protocol or pattern that you may or may not see. Yeah.
There are definite indicators for second generation intergenerational trauma. So that's the parent who experienced the trauma and firsthand, and then the child who is dealing with all kinds of triggers and they don't know why because they didn't go through it. And it's actually interesting when you look into the genocides in general. So the things that second generation Holocaust survivors feel is very similar to what the children of survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki feel. It's very similar to what the survivors of Japanese internment camps feel. It's similar to what the children of 9/11 survivors feel. And we can just keep going on and on and on. Armenia, Syria, I'm pretty sure Myanmar is going to end up in that same boat. But there are a lot of similarities, and it's this unexplained anxiety. It's just a distrust of others, a fear of the world in general, just trying to control your situation. There is a perfectionism aspect that you have to be perfect, because if you're not, then somebody might notice you, and then that spells trouble, right? If you just blend in, you'll be fine. So, and Cambodia and Vietnam, those are a couple of other historical events that I find people, clients and others who have the same kind of, issues that they just don't understand where they're coming from. I find it just fascinating.
And from a Black American standpoint, about a month or so ago, but Kanye West, and people understood what he meant. Ultimately, he just wasn't the good purveyor or good communicator.
Yeah.
But when he said what was out of his mouth, everyone's like, what? And it just triggered, like you just said, all those characteristics that that are unidentified on some level. That, I think you and others in this, like you said, multi-generations later, are able to at least have people work through them and make that transformation.
Right. And, I've gone to so many second generation groups and for the Holocaust, groups and conferences, and the most that they do is you sit around, you have a little, breakout session, and a psychologist says, "Oh, here are the things that a lot of 2Gs feel," and everybody sits there and goes, "Yeah, that's me. Okay, I feel better," and then they leave. Okay, but how do you get past it? It's almost like you're told that this is your life and accept it. Now that you know you're normal, you're going to live your life this way. And I don't believe that. I think that I'm kind of a voice that I'm a fish swimming upstream, frankly. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that it's our duty to stay in pain. I've been told this by some other second-generation survivors, that it's our duty to stay in pain, and if we don't, then we're, if we try to heal, then we're not honoring the memory of our dead relatives. And I don't know if I can use profanity, but I call BS. To me, that's BS. I don't know what my relatives would have wanted, but if I project forward to my kids and my grandkids, I wouldn't want them to stay in pain and be miserable and not achieve their life's dreams because of me.
Yeah.
So but that is a quote unquote thing. I don't know if that's the same with survivors of, say, Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge or Vietnam or anything. I don't know. I haven't delved into that as much, but I plan to.
And I really like
the psychology about. Sorry, I was just going to say the psychology around second-generation Holocaust survivors is really. It's really either we want to heal and we want to, we're not forgetting, we just want to forgive, or it's we need to stay in pain because of them.
Yeah. I've always found that interesting, to where someone might say, well, they interpret wanting to get out of pain as, well, you just don't care. Or that's like, no, how is that? It's like, I just want to feel good. That doesn't mean that I don't care.
If I feel better, then that means I'm not respecting my ancestors' memory, and that's just not true.
I know.
And so one of the things that I like to say is that forgiving does not mean forgetting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't mean forgetting at all.
Yeah, I'm sure you used to. I don't know if you used to watch it, but they had an episode on Seinfeld where they were watching. You know what I'm talking about, and he had to apologize for the rest of the episode because of a because he was laughing during a somber movie. So yeah. And I like that we had this conversation, Emily, because I just finished Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, the whole series, and one of the podcasts was about Sammy Davis Jr. and him, and just talking to you, I was able to identify a lot of the trauma that he went through, and that influenced a lot of his decisions, probably unbeknownst to him. He didn't have the expertise on your end. And the other thing that we didn't even talk about, and I want to get your take on it, is, usually when you think of abuse in a family, it's usually the father. And so what's it been like when going out into the public talking about not only your mom, but a woman that's 5'4", that it shouldn't happen with her. She's totally the antithesis of the image of a abuser.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say that, that image is of a physical abuser, first of all, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
My mother was emotional and physical. That's interesting. I hadn't considered that most of them were the dad, and you're totally right. No one's called me on that before. No one's asked me this question. Again, I think it's awesome because it makes
with the homies.
It makes me think differently. I love it. That is really interesting. I was a teeny tiny kid. My parents were not big. My mom, again, she was 5'4" on a good day. When she died, I think she was 4'11", and my grandmother was tiny. I've never considered, I'm just being totally honest, I've never considered that most physical abusers are the father. But don't we usually think of that as a sexual thing? Mine was never in that realm. Mm-hmm. My dad did not do any of that. He was just a really sweet man, but he was totally coward. He would cower when my mom would come around, and so what that did, okay, I'm going to turn this a little. What that did was, in my mind, make me disrespect my father because he didn't stand up to her, and so I saw men as, you know what, you're not good enough. You're just not good enough. You're not strong. And I will say, pretty much every relationship I've had, I've walked away from because I felt like the man isn't good enough. He didn't meet my incredibly high expectations. And that was because how my mom treated my father. Mm-hmm. So I know that's not really answering your question, but it's an interesting twist on, it explains how I behaved because of her. And she abused me, but she also abused him, and yet my perception of my father was, gee, why don't you stand up to her? Be a man. Right? So I know I'm not really answering your question. It's because I don't have that, you're asking me great questions, and now I have to write another book, damn it. And I know what it's going to be called. I've been waiting to use this title, and I just haven't.
Nice.
You can give his co-author credits.
Well, you're absolutely right. I think about my friends who tell me about their abuse, and it's all at the hands of their father.
Mm-hmm. Emily, let me ask this question real quick. So I know in your book, in that first chapter, you talked about as a child, you just wanted to be held and snuggled, and you said you don't ever remember, any of that. You just positive. So I was wondering, as a result of that, when you were raising your own children, did you intentionally, like go the opposite direction and make sure you always showed them love and give them validation? And did you find yourself doing that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. My ultimate goal, especially with my daughter, was to make sure that I didn't repeat the mistakes. Unfortunately, because my husband and I divorced, that it ended up not working out that way, but I definitely spent a lot of time, validating her feelings. I didn't have the Holocaust trump card like my mom did. I mean, basically, whenever I came home and said, well, this happened at school, and this, she's like, well, whatever. You weren't in concentration camp. And it's like, well, no, I wasn't. And then the conversation stops. And that is actually something that goes across all second-gen survivors. There's just nothing to say. Yeah. You're right. We can't. Okay, but we're here in the States. And so, but with my daughter, especially with my daughter, I definitely made sure that she was snuggled and validated. And my son, both of them are great kids. They're both, I would actually say my son is more of an emotional being than my daughter. She actually reminds me of my mother. In fact, I think my mom is channeled through her.
That was going to be part of my question, because when you're yelling like, you better shut that door, we're not trying to heat the whole neighborhood. I sound like my parents, right? And I was just wondering if your son brings girls home and you're like, oh my God, he's repeating, like he didn't even plan it, but he's repeating, like he's bringing home grandma.
Oh wow. No. No. That's interesting. No, he had a very short-lived girlfriend in high school who I adored. I was a tennis coach, and she was on the tennis team, and she was really sweet. She says, would it be okay if Josh and I dated? I'm like, yes, Margaret, because she was valedictorian, going to UCLA for med school. I'm like, yes, totally. And they didn't last very long. It was actually my son, and I was really not happy with him. But he's been dating a girl for 3 years, and I don't see any connection with my mother or with me or anyone. I actually I've been with them together. I love the way she looks at him and he looks at her. And I've commented on that I think that it's lovely. I love how more than she looks at him, how he looks at her, because as a woman, that what he does is what I would want to have done to me. And I think it's wonderful. They are apart for the first time. They went to college together, and then now she's at Berkeley getting her master's, and he's working in LA, and we'll see what happens. But I do really respect their relationship, and I don't think it has any connection, which is a good thing. My son is a really warm, real, easy to approach person. So yeah, he and I have a lot of similarities, more than his sister and I just There are things where I look at her and I'm like, you are my mom. Oh. And some of that has to do with, my mom would make fun of me if I was emotional. And I will just say that my daughter is not an emotional person, and I have a hard time connecting with that.
Mm-hmm.
When you lived in the Bay Area, where did you live at?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I said, when you were living in the Bay Area, what city were you living at?
I was in Berkeley.
Okay. All right.
You know it?
Well, I'm originally from San Jose, so I was born and raised in the Bay Area. So.
Yeah. I spent years. I did a tour to Bay. I went to Cal. Ended up with my first job in Menlo Park. Moved back up slowly up the peninsula, back to San Francisco, and then down to San Jose, then around the East Bay, back up, and eventually back in Berkeley.
Berserkly, as they call it.
Yeah. It's just not the way it was when I was there, but, people will ask, well, why didn't your kids want to go to Berkeley? It's such a great school. I'm like, if you grew up there, you don't want to stay.
It's different.
Yeah.
We covered a lot of ground, and we touched on trauma without actually going and sticking in the mud, if you will, and are better people because of it.
And I will say, I want to get back on the phone with you because, oh my gosh, you made me think. You asked me questions that I have not really been asked before. And I'm not saying that, others have been, like, really gentle. It's just I really like how you've pushed into different directions.
Awesome. And I do want to say, congratulations for getting the physical copy in the bookstores and getting the second book launched as well. So, I'm sure we have a lot to talk about. We'd love to stay in touch with you. Yeah,
that would be great. Yeah, then we can talk about women in their 80s and 90s being mean and inappropriate. Actually, I have a soccer thing. The World Cup is right now. I actually have a soccer anecdote.
Oh, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, you want to hear it?
Yeah.
Okay. So when my mom, in her later years, as some older adults do, they can't tell when they have flatulence. My mother would, have an episode, and the kids and I had a code. So yellow card was, oops, we heard it. Red card was, we heard it, we smelled it, we need to leave. Yeah.
Well, if your sessions are as lighthearted as this, then I can't think of any trauma right now, but I need to sign up. And how can I get in touch with you for signing up for your coaching, and where can we get in touch with you as far as getting your books and social media and all that good stuff?
Okay, so my website, I know, I'm kind of like, really, am I really a trauma healing coach? I think that's actually one of the things that draws people to me, because I just bring out the lightheartedness and things. So my website is traumahealingcoach.com, as you mentioned in the intro. And my first book, From Generation to Generation, is now available in bookstores across the country. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Amazon, wherever. And if you want my second book, my new book, it's actually free for the next few days on Amazon, and that one's called The Daughter's Dilemma. Or if you miss the window, you can just go to my website, and there's a tab called Books, and pull down on, there are two options. One is for the first book, one is for the new book, and you can just download the new one for free. All you have to do is put your email, name, your first name, last name, and I'll send it off to you.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, you have just been attuned to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza.
And I'm David.
And Emily, it was a pleasure. Let's definitely stay in touch.
Let's do that. I enjoyed this so much.
Yeah, thanks
awesome.
for being here.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Okay.
You guys still there?
Thanks again for checking out another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective podcast. Please check us out on our website at intrinsicmotivation.life, where you can click on the Speak Pipe button and leave any suggestions for future podcasts that you'd like us to cover. Also, check us out on our social media sites. We have a YouTube channel, Facebook page, iTunes podcast, in addition to Stitcher and Google Play, all under Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. Check you out next time. Have a great day.